Okay, so in this video, I'm talk about several different things, and hopefully it's going to give you a better understanding of how the system that we're in works. So whenever the new fiscal year comes about, which is from October to October, in October, the federal government will pass its spending bills. So what happens is because the Constitution is actually a government for governing the military and not much else, they have to set out a mission. So every fiscal year before they pass the bills, they have to set out their mission. Their mission will tell them what they need to accomplish for that fiscal year. And it also project what they need to accomplish it, which it has tied to it a monetary value. So with the new mission, which is to cut out the sickness, I guess, the one that came from Wuhan or wherever it was, and in order to squash that, they needed to set a mission to do it. And then the mission to do it came with a dollar price. So that was in the infrastructure bill, I guess it was like $3 trillion infrastructure bill that they passed in October. In order to carry out that mission, they need 309 new jobs. So this is creating more jobs in the federal sector and taking people out of the private sector and putting them into the federal sector to work for the government. Okay, so here's a list of 309 jobs just for the sickness and the infrastructure bill for the next fiscal year. And most of the time, once these people get hired, they never get laid off. So that's 309 more people. And so when they talk about the job numbers, they're talking about it's really skewed because they're enlarging the federal state. So here's a job for a physician. So I wanted to talk for a minute about the licenses. All doctors working on federal lands have to have a license because the license is actually for working on federal lands. And I know the state issues the license, but you have to also understand that the federal government has states that it controls. These are the dependent states that I've talked about repeatedly in some of my videos. So on the federal lands, when the doctors are working with the military, they have to have a license. If a service is not provided by the medical facility on the military post, that military person has to go off post to a hospital or a doctor that has a license and is contracted to do work with the government and its military people. So if you're on post working and you have an office on post, you have to have a license. If you're off post working with military people, you have to have a license. If you're a private doctor working with the private people, not affiliated with the federal government, you do not have to have a license unless you're taking insurance from insurance companies that are registered as doing business with the federal government. So we have this huge system of people registering to do work with the federal government and then coming under federal laws because the federal government is telling people they have to, even though they don't. The fact that they do is putting them in under these non-appropriated fund instrumentalities and governed by them outside the Constitution because non-appropriated fund instrumentalities are not part of the Constitution. The infrastructure bill does not include the money that they siphon off of the private people because the money doesn't come from government, or from the feds, it comes from the private sector. So what they're doing is they're using these hospitals and insurance companies and the Federal Reserve Bank, the CDC, the FDA, they're using them as contractors working for the federal government to siphon money off of the private people, because the federal government cannot grow at the rate that it grows without pretending to or lying to the private people and telling them that they have to do all this stuff so that they can get money from them. So these are contractors working for the federal government, siphoning money off the private people through taxation, fees, and all these other things to increase the wealth of the federal state. So here, this doctor, this is a job announcement for a doctor, so that the federal can meet the requirements of the mission that it set out, and hire all of these doctors using the money that it gave to itself through the infrastructure bill. So this is one way in which the federal government increases itself, enlarges itself, expands its business, is by hiring more people to work for it, by convincing more people that they have to do business with it. Okay, so the license requirement is for anyone working on federal lands or anyone working off federal lands with military people or people who claim to be citizens of the United States. So this job is open to the public. The public are U.S. citizens, nationals, or those who owe allegiance to the United States. So the public are the people who have an oath, because a U.S. citizen will have an oath, a national will have an oath, or someone with an allegiance has an oath. So people who have an oath, or so if you don't have an oath, then you could be a dependent of someone who has an oath. So you can be a U.S. citizen if you're the dependent of a military person and you're living on a military post. Requirements. Let's see, who may apply? And then licensure. Applicants must possess a current active, full, and unrestricted license or registration as a physician from a state. Now it's talking about its dependent state, because you have to go back to Lincoln and how he took over the states using military force, or how he got the states to agree to be friendly to the Union. And so it changed really the structure of the federal government. So then the federal government made itself sovereign over the states, whereas prior to Lincoln, the states were sovereign over the federal government. So the states could pull away from the federal government at any time, and that would reduce the size of the federal government. Whereas now there's so much confusion about what a state even is, that people don't realize that they have a federal state inside their state, that Lincoln took over the entire state, the independent state, the sovereign state, and brought it in under the Constitution. And even though he did it illegally and outside of his office, and which means that it doesn't actually apply, it's illegal and it's void, not voidable in court, people are still under the impression that they're under the federal government. So when it talks about the state, the District of Columbia, notice it says this District of Columbia. So if it meant the entire state where Columbia is inside of, why didn't it just leave it at state? Why did it also put District of Columbia if it's covered under state? Because state are the military areas inside of an independent state. Okay, the District of Columbia is the federal area inside that state. The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, or territory of the United States. Territory meaning lands that haven't been made into independent states and are just territories then. Okay, so we have an infrastructure bill written to conform to the mission that the federal government decided was important. And to accomplish that mission, they have to hire 309 more people to work for the federal government, which enlarges the federal government. So what they do when they decide how much they're going to pay is they go off the military post and they look at the private sector and see what is being paid to people in the private sector. Once they see that, they come back to the post, they up the salary so that people find it lucrative. They find it that they can make more money if they go and work for the federal government, which again increases the size of the federal government. So the federal government sets its own agenda, passes a bill giving them the money to accomplish that agenda, and then hire all the people it needs to accomplish the mission of the agenda. Okay, and that is how this system works. So here I wanted to look at some of the independent establishments and government corporations. Okay, there's no allowance for a government corporation, profit or nonprofit, in the Constitution. There's no allowance for independent establishments that work for the federal government. So we can look at some of these: Administrative Conference of the United States, African Development Foundation, Broadcasting Board of Governors, Central Intelligence Agency, okay, the Federal Reserve System, that comes under banks and banking, as I've shown you in some of my videos, are not under a title that has been passed into law. So we can look at banks and banking here. Title 12 doesn't have a positive law citation. And to find that, we look at the front matter, and there won't be one there. There isn't one there because banks and banking is not in accordance with the Constitution. It's outside the Constitution, and it's an independent establishment or government corporation. Okay, it has no authority. It's not on federal lands purchased properly through the state, through the sovereign state from the people, the way the Constitution lays it out. Okay, so there's no authority for the Federal Reserve System to do anything that it's doing, but the federal government uses it to help it get money from the private sector. And then it prints the money that the federal government needs to set out its mission and pass its bills and hire all the extra people that it needs to hire, which increases itself. So what it does is it's using these independent establishments and government corporations to help it increase the size of itself. And not to mention, we have certain things that go on, such as the sickness for the last few years that we don't really know for sure where it came from. If it was, there's some debate about whether or not it was man-made. I think it's been somewhat proven that it has been. And so if that's true, then it's creating a reason to set a new mission, to pass an infrastructure bill, to enlarge itself by creating jobs within itself for people to apply to that make it come under itself. So it's turning itself into a corporation, okay? And it's doing it deceitfully, fraudulently, outside of the Constitution, and it just keeps rolling along. So what we have here basically is a military dictatorship, or a
stratocracy.
Government by military forces, a military government, okay? So people call it authoritarian. Well, yes, authoritarianism is a type of military stratocracy.